Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. I never thought I would return to this town. The air smelled the same damp earth, the distant scent of burning wood. The streets looked unchanged, yet something in them had shifted. Or perhaps it was me. I had been gone for so long, but the past never truly loosened its grip. I walked past the old church at the town centre. Its tall steeple stretched toward the sky like a pleading hand. The bell was silent, though I could almost hear its chime echo in my mind. The townsfolk always said that when the bell rang by itself, it meant something was coming. A chill crawled up my spine. My name is Ethan. I grew up here among these cobbled streets and aging houses. I had once called this place home. Now I wasn't too sure what it was to me. Memories pressed in as I walked toward my family's old house, a place I had sworn never to return to. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for the door. The wood was worn, the paint peeling. It creaked as I pushed it open, revealing the darkened hallway inside. The silence was overwhelming. I stepped in, and the air grew heavier around me. The scent of dust and something faintly metallic filled my lungs. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight. I remembered every creak, every shadow cast by the dim light filtering through the curtains. Then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, distant, just at the edge of my hearing. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted toward the staircase leading to the second floor. It stood there, dark and unmoving, yet the sound had come from above. Had someone broken in? I swallowed hard. My rational mind fought against the unease curling in my guts. The house had been abandoned for years. It was probably just the wind for broken windows. But the whisper had sounded like a voice. I took a hesitant step forward. Then another. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I placed my foot on the first step. The wood groaned under me, the sound far too loud in the quiet. Another whisper. Clearer now. Closer. I reached the top of the stairs and turned down the hall. My old bedroom door stood slightly ajar. The dim light of dusk cast long shadows through the cracks. I knew I should leave. Turn back. Forget this place. But something pulled me forward. I pushed the door open. The room was exactly as I had left it. The bed, the desk, the bookshelf filled with old forgotten stories. Dust covered every surface undisturbed by time. Then I saw it. A single footprint in the dust. Fresh. Not mine. A slow creeping horror spread through me. The whisper came again, this time right behind me. I turned, and the door slammed shut. The door slammed shut with a force that sent dust swirling into the air. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Silence. A deep, unnatural silence, the kind that swallowed even the sound of my own breathing. I turned toward the door, my fingers reaching for the handle. Cold. Ice cold. The kind of cold that burned. I yanked my hand back, my fingertips tingling with numbness. This wasn't normal. A draft, I told myself. Just a draft. Alt houses shift doors close on their own. That was all. Then the whisper returned. Right behind me. A low murmur, like someone speaking just beneath their breath. I spun around, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it would crack my ribs. The room was empty, but the whisper hadn't stopped. It was coming from the corner. The farthest corner of the room where the shadows stretched unnaturally long. Even in the dim light, that part of the room seemed darker. I forced my feet to move, each step feeling heavier than the last. My body screamed at me to turn and run, but my mind, to God help me, wanted to see. The whispering grew clearer. Not words, not exactly. A sound shifting and curling in on itself, like something speaking from the other side of a veil. My skin prickled with something ancient, something instinctive. I stopped just a foot away from the shadowed corner. My breath hitched. The dust on the wooden floor was disturbed, swirled into patterns. Circles. Marks. Like someone had been standing there. No. Not standing. Kneeling. The air around me thickened, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. I reached forward, hesitating only for a second before my fingers grazed the darkness. A rush of cold shot up my arm. In. A sharp, biting pain, like nails raking against my skin. I yanked my hand back, a strangled cry escaping my throat. The darkness in the corner shifted just barely, just enough. I saw something. Not a figure, not a face. A shape. A void where there should have been nothing. Then movement. The whisper turned into a breath. A slow, deliberate inhale. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in something deeper. A voice that wasn't a voice. A sound that resonated inside my bones. You came back. A single sentence. The room seemed to twist. The wall shuddered, the ceiling groaned. The dust in the air thickened, turning the light into a hazy, suffocating blur. I stumbled backward, hitting the desk. My hand knocked something over a book. It hit the floor with a dull thud, and in that moment the whispering stopped. The weight pressing against my chest lifted. The air cleared. The room was just a room again, except for one thing. The book. It lay open on the floor, its yellowed pages staring up at me. My eyes locked onto the words printed in old, fading ink. A name. My name. Written over and over. Scrawled desperate. And underneath it a date. A date that hadn't happened yet. A date that was just 5 days from now. I couldn't move. My name was scrawled across the brittle pages, written in uneven, desperate strokes. The ink was faded, but the date beneath it, bold, unmistakable, was fresh. 5 days from now. A chill spread through my spine, slow and deliberate, like icy fingers tracing each vertebra. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe, to think. Someone had been here before me. Someone who knew my name, who knew I would return. But how? And why? The room felt heavier now. The air thick with dust and something else, something metallic. Corporeal. Like blood. I knelt down, hesitating only for a second before picking up the book. The cover was leather-bound, cracked with age, but the pages inside were filled with more than just my name. I flipped through them. Lists. Names, dates. Some I recognized, old-town names, the kind you only hear in whispered stories. Others meant nothing to me, but the pattern was clear. Each name repeated over and over, always followed by a date. And none of the dates were in the past. My pulse pounded against my temples. This wasn't a journal. It was a record. A prophecy. I shut the book with a sharp snap, clutching it to my chest as I stood. The room seemed different now, tilted, wrong. The light filtering through the window had dimmed, but the sun hadn't yet set. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, reaching toward me like grasping hands. I needed to leave. I turned toward the door, fingers wrapping around the handle. This time, it wasn't cold. It turned easily under my grip. And then, a sound. Not a whisper. Not a breath. A knock. From the other side of the door. My stomach lurched. The knock came again, slow, deliberate. 3 times. Someone was there. I held my breath, ears straining. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement beyond the wood. Just silence, thick and expectant. I took a step back. Then, bam. The door shuddered violently as if something had slammed into it from the other side. The entire frame rattled, the handle twisting in my grip. I stumbled away, heart hammering against my ribs. Bam. The force behind it was unnatural, relentless. The wall seemed to tremble, the old wood groaning in protest. Then, just as suddenly as it began, silence. I stared at the door, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gulps. It remained shut, but the handle still twitched slightly, as if something had just let go. I forced myself to move, my legs shaky beneath me. I needed to get out. Now, clutching the book, I reached for the door again, this time yanking it open without hesitation. The hallway beyond was empty, the dim light casting long, distorted shadows. But the air had changed. It was heavy, charged, like the moments before a storm. And then I saw them. Footprints, leading away from my door down the hall. But they weren't mine. The dust was thick, undisturbed except for those prints. bare feet, and they led to the staircase, to the floor below, to whatever was waiting for me in the dark. The footprints led downward. There. Human but wrong. The toes were too long, the arch too deep, as if the feet pressing into the dust were tea meant for walking. I swallowed, gripping the book so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breath was uneven, my body stiff with the unnatural instinct to run. But where? The only way out was past those footprints down the stairs, through the darkness below. I forced myself forward, one step at a time. The floor creaked under my weight, the sound sharp in the silence. Each footstep echoed, but something about it was off. The sound should have faded, but instead, it felt like the echoes were following me, growing louder. I reached the top of the staircase and stopped. The footprints disappeared at the bottom. They simply ended. No turn, no shift in direction, just vanished into the wooden floor. I gritted my teeth. Think, Ethan. Think. There had to be a logical explanation. Someone had been here, walked these halls, and then what? Jumped into nothingness? No. There was something I wasn't seeing. A breath of cold air passed through the house, carrying the scent of damp wood and something deeper, fouler. The metallic tang of rust. No. Blood. My throat tightened. The house was listening. I could feel it now, our presence pressing against my skin like unseen hands. It had been here all along, waiting beneath the silence, beneath the dust. I took the first step down. The wood groaned under me. The moment my foot left the step, a sound. A single dragging breath. Long. Wet. Like lungs struggling to pull in air through something thick. I stopped. The sound had come from below. From the darkness. I held my breath. The air was so still it felt unnatural. My ears strained against the silence. Was it my imagination? A chirk of the old house? Then, a shuffle. Something moved. Not fast, not sudden and deliberate. The faintest shift of weight against wood. I clenched my jaw, forcing my body to keep going. Step by step, closer to whatever waited for me at the bottom. The light from the upper floor stretched ahead of me, fading into the thick darkness below. My foot hit the final step. Silence. I turned my head slightly, scanning the dim living room. The furniture was covered in sheets, draped like coats. The air was thick with dust, swirling lazily through the fading light. Nothing. I exhaled, my fingers relaxing just slightly around the book. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe. A whisper. Directly behind me. I spun around. The staircase was empty. The hallway above still and silent. But the footprints, they were gone. My stomach twisted. I knew what I had seen. They had been there, imprinted in the dust, leading downward. But now, the floor was smooth, untouched, as if no one had ever walked there at all. I took a step back. My shoulder brushed against something a chair still covered. My breath came fast, shallow. The book in my hands felt heavier. Then I noticed the door. The basement door. Slightly open. A sliver of pure darkness stretched from the crack. It hadn't been opened before. I was sure of it. Something was down there. Watching. Waiting. The whisper came again. Thought. Close. 5 days, Ethan. The door creaked. And then it began to open. The basement door inched open with a slow, deliberate creak. The darkness behind it was thick, swallowing what little light reached it. It wasn't just the absence of illumination, it was deeper, heavier. A void that seemed to pull at the edges of reality, stretching the air around it. I didn't want to look. But something inside me, something twisted between fear and a terrible, gnawing curiosity wouldn't let me turn away. I took a step forward. The floor felt different beneath my feet, softer somehow as if the wood itself had changed. The air, thick with dust, carried something else, now a stench. Damp earth, mold, and the sharp, unmistakable scent of decay. I reached the doorframe. The basement stairs descended into pure black. No railing, no light switch, just an open maw leading down, down, down. My fingers tightened around the book, its leather covered damp with the sweat of my palms. Then, from below, a sound. Faint. Subtle. Drip. A slow, deliberate drop of liquid hitting wood. Then another. Drip. I sucked in a breath. My body screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. Something was down there. Something waiting. And then, a hand. It shot out from the darkness. Thin, grey, fingers too long, stretching from the black void below. It latched onto the edge of the door frame, the nail splitting as they dug into the wood. I choked back a scream. The fingers twitched. Twisted. The knuckles popped unnaturally as they pulled something forward, dragging more of the thing into view. An arm. Pale, stretched too thin, skin sagging over sharp bones. The thing was crawling up the stairs. I stumbled back, my chest tight with terror. The whisper came again, curling through the thick air like smoke. You came back. The voice wasn't human. It was Lair, warped, spoken from behind the walls, beneath the floorboards, from the very bones of the house itself. Then I saw its face. No eyes. Just hollows where they should have been, black and endless. The mouth too wide, lips cracked and bleeding. Its skin loose, sagging, shifting, as if it wasn't sure what shape it was supposed to take. It knew me. It had been waiting. And it was smiling. The book in my hands burned. The leather heated against my skin, the ink on the pages seeming to shift and writhe. The names, the dates my name, my date glowing faintly in the dim light. The thing lurched forward. Its movements weren't natural. Like a puppet with broken strings, jerking in twisted angles as it pulled itself up the stairs. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. My feet barely touched the ground as I tore through the house, the walls around me groaning. The hallway stretched, the shadows deepening, the door at the end feeling miles away. But I didn't stop. The whispers grew louder. 5 days, Ethan. Front door so close now. My fingers fumbled with the lock, slick with sweat. The whispers behind me, inside me. I yanked the door opened. Darkness. Not the street. Not the outside world. Just the same endless void. As if the house had swallowed everything. As if there was no escape. And then, a hand on my shoulder. Cold. Wet. The whisper now right against my ear. Too late. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let us continue. Have you ever seen something you weren't supposed to see? Something so wrong, so natural, that it stayed in your mind etched into the back of your skull, whispering to you in the quiet moments of your life. I have. And I wish I hadn't. It started on a cold autumn evening. The kind of evening where the wind carried a bite, slipping through the cracks of old buildings, rattling the loose window panes. The streets were nearly empty, save for the occasional figure wrapped in heavy coats, heads down, moving quickly to their destinations. I wasn't supposed to be out that night. I should have been at home, buried under blankets, ignoring the world. But something pulled me outside, a restless energy I couldn't shake. So I walked. The streets of my town were familiar, too familiar. I had lived here all my life, knew every alley, every shortcut. But that night the streets felt different. Quieter. The usual hum of distant traffic was absent. No dogs barking. No voices. Only the wind, sighing through the empty roads. Then I saw them. At first, I thought they were just shadows. A group of figures moving in unison, gliding between the buildings, their shapes almost blending into the darkness. They didn't speak. They didn't look around. They simply moved with a strange, deliberate grace, as if following a silent rhythm. Curiosity got the better of me. I followed. Their path led me out of the familiar streets, past the old railway, into the outskirts of town. The road here was cracked, lined with abandoned warehouses and overgrown lots. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic. I should have turned back. But I didn't. The figures disappeared into an old factory. a relic from another time, its rusted frame barely holding together. The windows were shattered, the roof sagging, and yet, inside it, light. A dull flickering glow seeped through the broken glass. It wasn't the sterile white of electric bulbs. It was warmer, a natural. I crept closer, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Through a gap in the crumbling wall, I saw them. A dozen figures, dressed in long, tattered robes, standing in a perfect circle. Their faces were obscured by deep hoods, their hands clasped together. They weren't speaking. They weren't chanting. They simply stood. Still. Silent. In the center of the circle lay something. A shape covered in cloth and moving. The fabric was dark, almost black, but I could see something seeping through it. A thick, glistening witness spreading across the floor. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to move, to step back, but I couldn't. Something held me in place. Not a force, not a grip, something in my mind. Then, the air shifted. The figures turned. Not all at once. No. Their heads moved one by one, a ripple through the circle, until every single hooded face was facing me, watching. I stumbled backward, my hands scraping against the rough wall. No one spoke. No one moved. And then, the figure on the ground twitched. I froze. I thought I had imagined it. My eyes had to be playing tricks on me. The figure, still hidden beneath the dark cloth, couldn't have moved. It was impossible. But there it was, that faint twitch again, like a shudder. The air in the factory grew heavier, suffocating. It was as if the world had narrowed down to that single moment. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. I felt watched. The figures, those road people, still didn't move. But their eyes never left me. I could feel their gaze like a weight pressing on my skin, my back, my bones. The silence was deafening. It wasn't like any silence I had ever known. It was alive, almost tangible. I should have run. I should have screamed, but the words wouldn't come. My feet were glued to the ground. I couldn't turn away. I couldn't even blink. And then the twitching stopped. The figure on the ground lay still once more. But it felt different now. It felt like something had changed. There was a low hum, barely audible at first, like the deep vibrations of the earth itself. It grew louder, pulsing with a rhythm I couldn't understand. It wasn't a natural sound, it was unnatural, something older. The robed figures raised their hands, each in perfect unison, and I felt a coldness seep into the very air around me. A sharp chill that made my skin crawl. The smell in the air thickened, metallic and rancid, as if the earth itself was revolting against what was happening. One of the figures, standing at the far side of the circle, stepped forward. His robes barely fluttered as he moved, like the fabric was part of the wind, flowing without disturbance. He reached for the cloth that covered the figure on the ground, and with a slow, deliberate motion, he pulled it away. I couldn't see it at first. Not clearly. There was something in the way. Something obscure, shadowed beneath the light. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. It wasn't a person. It was the thing. A pale, twisted mass of flesh and bone. The skin, stretched too thin, almost translucent, looked raw and unnatural. Its limbs were too long, too thin, the joints bent in ways they shouldn't have been. But its face was what haunted me. It was human, but it wasn't. The eyes were wide open, empty, but they glowed faintly, a sickly yellow that seemed to pierce straight through me. It wasn't dead. It was alive. And it was watching me. I stumbled back, hitting the cold stone wall behind me with a sickening thud. My legs felt like jelly. I didn't know what I was seeing, couldn't comprehend it. It was as if my mind couldn't grasp the horror unfolding in front of me. The figure that had uncovered the thing stepped back into place, blending seamlessly into the circle once more. The others began to move. Slowly they circled the creature, their robes trailing like wisps of smoke in the dim light. Their hands reached out, hovering over the thing, as though they were conducting some sort of ritual. The hum intensified, vibrating through my teeth, my bones. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the hum stopped. The silence returned, but it was different. It was filled with something. The figures raised their heads, their eyes fixing on me once more. I knew what they wanted. I didn't know how, but I could feel it in my gut, the terrible, cold truth. They weren't just performing a ritual. They were waiting for something. Waiting for me. I wanted to leave. I wanted to turn and run, but my body didn't obey. It felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted, and now I was sinking into something darker. Something I couldn't escape. The one who had uncovered the creature stepped forward again, this time coming closer. The distance between us seemed to stretch for miles, yet with each step he took, I felt like he was already at my side. His voice came in a whisper, so low I almost didn't hear it. "You've seen too much, haven't you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't and then I saw it. A glint in his hand, something shiny. A blade. A sharp, glinting knife. And he was coming for me. I didn't think. My body moved before my mind could catch up. The figure was almost upon me. I could hear the soft whisper of his robes as they brushed against the stone floor. The blade glinted under the dim light, and I knew I had to run. I turned, my legs nearly buckling beneath me. The factory was a maze of shadows and broken equipment, but all I could see was the exit. I focused on it, the door that led to the outside, to fresh air, to safety. But as I stumbled forward, I realized something terrible. The exit was farther than it had been a moment ago. The walls of the factory seemed to stretch, growing taller, closing in. I could feel the air getting thicker with each step. I whipped around, my breath coming in short, frantic bursts. The figures were moving now, gliding like shadows surrounding me. I was trapped. The man with the knife was closest. His eyes glowed like fireflies, cold and unblinking. The blade in his hand gleamed, almost beckoning me. I could hear the soft scrape of the metal against stone, like a promise. He wasn't just coming for me, he was waiting for me to run. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know what this ritual was or what they had planned for me, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't let them catch me. I darted to the left, diving into the shadows of the factory as dark corners. The walls seemed to pulse around me, alive, like they were watching, breathing, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I couldn't breathe. The air was too thick, too suffocating. Every corner of the factory seemed like a dead end, every door locked shut. I heard the scrape of boots on the floor, growing louder with each passing second. They were closer. I could feel their presence, even without seeing them. I turned a corner, and then another, hoping to lose them in the maze of the factory. But there was no escape. The space was shifting, changing. I had to get out. The ground trembled beneath me. I almost stumbled, but caught myself just in time. I looked up there at the far end of the factory, a single light flickered to life. It was dim, like a candleless flame, but it was there, a guiding light. I rushed toward it. The figures were behind me now, their footsteps echoing through the factory. With the light, it felt like salvation. As I neared it, I saw that the light came from a doorway, an open door. My heart pounded. I could feel the cold breeze from outside, the world beyond the factory. I was almost there. But then I heard a voice. It was soft at first, almost a whisper. "You can leave." I stopped. It came from the door, from the shadows just beyond the light. I couldn't see who was speaking, but I knew I couldn't run anymore. I was frozen, paralyzed by the voice that seemed to wrap itself around my thoughts, suffocating me. The figures had stopped moving. I could feel their eyes on me, their presence surrounding me. The silence was no longer comforting, it was pressing in on me, suffocating every thought, every movement. And then I saw it. Through the doorway, past the flickering light, something moved. I couldn't see it clearly, but I felt it something huge, something wrong. Its shape was unnatural, like a distortion in the very fabric of reality. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. It was staring at me. I couldn't look away. The voice came again, louder now, echoing through the factory. "You belong to us." The words reverberated in my chest, vibrating in my bones. They weren't just words. They were a command. A truth. I took a step back, but my feet felt heavy, like they were sinking into the ground. The darkness seemed to pull at me, trying to drag me in. I had no choice. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The light flickered one last time, and then it went out. The factory was plunged into total darkness. But the voice, the presence, it was still there. It was always there. Watching. Waiting. And then I felt it. A cold hand on my shoulder. It wasn't just a touch. It was sharp like ice, like something that shouldn't be touching me. It felt like it was reaching inside me, pulling at my very soul. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight, but there was nothing I could do. The darkness swallowed me whole. The last thing I heard was that voice, so close now, as if it was in my ear. You readers now. I work in a place that wasn't the factory. The air was different here, thick and cold. I could taste the musty scent of damp stone and something faintly metallic. It clung to my tongue like rust, leaving an aftertaste of something wrong. The ground beneath me was uneven, rough like I was lying on the edge of some ancient structure. My arms were heavy, as if weighed down by chains I couldn't see. I tried to move, but my body felt sluggish, unresponsive. My mind was foggy, clouded by an almost physical sense of fear. But it wasn't just fear. It was something deeper. Something that clung to my very soul. The memory of the voice, the dark presence, flooded back into me. It had said, "You belong to us." I hadn't imagined it. It wasn't just a dream or a trick of the mind. I felt it in my very being. Panic surged in my chest. I forced myself to sit up. The room, if that's even what this was vast, stretching out in every direction, filled with nothing but an oppressive darkness. There were no windows, no doors, just an endless expanse of cold stone. And then I noticed something that made my heart skip. The walls were moving. Not in the way walls do when you are dizzy or disoriented. These walls were breathing. I couldn't understand it, but I felt it. The walls pulsated slowly, like the rise and fall of a chest in a deep, dreamless sleep. The air became heavy with each breath the stone took, and each breath seemed to draw me closer to it, as if the walls were alive. I could hear it now, that faint whisper of movement. It was soft at first, so soft I thought it might be my imagination. But it grew louder, closer. The walls, the very space around me, seemed to hum with the energy of something ancient and powerful. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my legs wouldn't respond. I couldn't stand. I could barely even move. I looked down at my hands, expecting them to be covered in some kind of marks or symbols, but they were clean. Too clean. The skin was pale, smooth, no sign of the grime or blood from the factory. No sign of what had happened before. It didn't make sense. The whispers grew louder, and now I could make out words, though they were not in any language I recognized. It was like a chant, slow and rhythmic, each syllable vibrating through me. Come closer. The words were clear now, but they didn't come from the walls. They came from somewhere deeper, from the very core of this place. I had to go closer. I couldn't control it. My body moved against my will toward the sound, toward the source of the whispers. My feet shuffled across the cold stone floor, dragging me like a puppet on strings. It didn't take long to reach the center of the room. In the middle there was a circle marked by faint, glowing symbols etched into the ground. The symbols flickered in and out of existence, like flames that couldn't decide whether they were real. I stopped in the middle of the circle. The air around me shifted again, and for a brief moment I could feel the presence of something watching me. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. And then I saw it. The shadow. It was huge, standing at the edge of the circle, watching me with eyes that glowed. But there was something wrong with it. Its form was distorted, like it was shifting, changing shape, never quite staying the same. It was humanoid, but not quite. Its features were blurred, like it was made of smoke or shadows, but the eyes, they were unmistakable. Cold. Hungry. And it moved toward me. Slowly. The whispers were louder now, more distinct. The voices were pleading with me, urging me to stay, to join. But as it came closer, the weight of fear pressed down harder. I tried to step back, but my feet were rooted to the floor. The shadow reached out, its form stretching, twisting toward me. I could feel its presence surrounding me, closing in. And then it spoke. Its voice wasn't like the others. It wasn't a whisper. It was a command. You are ours. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. It wasn't just a statement, it was the truth. My body trembled. My heart beat faster, but I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. The air grew colder, suffocating, and I could feel something cold brush against my skin. It wasn't a hand. It was something worse. I could feel it sinking into my very soul. It was pulling me and changing me, melding me with it. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't think. And then, just when I thought I couldn't endure it any longer, I woke up. But this time, I wasn't in the factory. I wasn't in the dark room with the walls that breathed. I was somewhere else entirely. And I was no longer alone. Something was with me. I was awake, but I wasn't alone. The room I found myself in was small, claustrophobic, yet strangely familiar. The walls were rough stone, but the light here was different, dim and flickering, like the last remnants of a fire that had long since burned out. The shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, twisting like fingers reaching out to grasp me. I couldn't remember how I got here. I couldn't remember how long I'd been here. But I could feel it, the presence, like a heavy fog hanging in the air, pressing against my chest. It was suffocating, as if the room itself was alive, watching me, waiting. I sat up slowly, my hands trembling as I placed them on the cold floor. My body felt foreign, like it no longer belonged to me. It was heavier, as though it had been changed, reshaped in some way I couldn't comprehend. I looked around the room. There was nothing in it but stone and shadows. But something about the silence felt wrong, too still, like the calm before a storm. The whispering. It was faint at first, but it was there. That same chant, the same voices, distant yet urgent. I could almost make out the words, but they seemed to slip away the moment I tried to understand them. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like jelly, as though they hadn't been used in years. My head spun, the world tilting around me, but I pushed through it. I needed to move. I needed to leave. I staggered toward the door, but as I reached for the handle, it shifted. The door, once solid, now seemed to pulse with that same strange energy, its surface rippling like water. I hesitated, my hand hovering over it, unsure if I was ready to face whatever lay beyond. The whispers grew louder. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were voices, calling me, beckoning me toward the door. There was something almost familiar about them, something that made my heart race with fear and longing. I couldn't ignore them. I grasped the handle and turned. The door opened with a sickening creak, and beyond it, the darkness stretched on, endless, like a void swallowing the light. But I couldn't turn back. I had to know what was out there. I stepped forward, the floor beneath me creaking with every step, my footsteps loud in the silence. The air felt thick, charged, like a storm was about to break. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the center of the hallway. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long, dark limbs that seemed to stretch out toward me like tendrils. Its face, if it could even be called a face, was an empty void, a black hole where its features should have been. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me with a presence so overwhelming it made my skin crawl. I froze. He belonged to us. The voice was different now. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a chant. It was a command. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I felt trapped in this place, like the walls themselves were closing in around me. My breath came in short gasps, each one more desperate than the last. It took a step toward me. The ground beneath it didn't touch the floor. It hovered, its feet never fully making contact with the ground, as though it didn't need to. It was a being that existed in a space outside of reality, a creature that didn't belong in this world. It reached out with one of its long, shapeless hands. I tried to move, tried to scream, but nothing came out. My throat was tight like a vice around my neck. The hand hovered just inches from my face, and for a moment everything went still. Time seemed to stretch out each second in eternity. The air became so heavy I thought I might suffocate. "You are ours." The words hit me like a physical blow, shaking me to my core. They weren't just words. They were a truth, a reality I couldn't escape. And then, as if the very fabric of existence was tearing apart, the figure vanished. It didn't retreat. It didn't leave. It just ceased to be. I was alone again, but the weight of its presence still hung in the air, like a shadow that refused to fade. The room around me hadn't changed, but I could feel it now, the shift. I had crossed a line. I had become part of something other. And I knew, deep down, that I would never be the same. What if the past never really left us? That was the first thought that crossed my mind when I opened the strange letter. It had arrived unexpectedly, without a return address, sealed in a wax emblem I had never seen before. The words, written in a hurried, uneven script, pointed me to a specific location, a small, forgotten graveyard on the outskirts of town. I didn't recognize the name of the place, nor did I recognize the sender. But something in my gut told me it was no coincidence. Maybe I was looking for something. Maybe I wasn't, but the mystery gnawed at me. Curiosity led me there. The cemetery was hidden behind a dense thicket of trees, the path leading to it barely visible through the overgrowth. The air was thick with humidity, and the world seemed unnervingly quiet, as if nature itself held its breath. Every step I took through the tangled underbrush felt like I was trespassing, intruding upon the secret that wasn't meant to be uncovered. The gravestones stood like silent sentinels, weathered by time, the once clear inscriptions now obscured by moss and lichen. As I walked deeper into the graveyard, an odd sensation crept over me, the feeling of being watched, of something moving just beyond the edge of my vision. But there was nothing. Nothing but the wind that whispered through the trees. I paused in front of one of the graves, my heart inexplicably racing. It was as if the place was pulling me, urging me to uncover something long forgotten. The name on the tombstone was unfamiliar and old, faded name that looked like it belonged to someone who had died centuries ago. Suddenly, I heard it. A soft rustle, like something shifting in the distance. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I spun around, but the graveyard was still. Silent. I didn't know why, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was there, just out of sight. I turned back to the grave, the strange inscription still burning in my mind. I knelt down, my fingers brushing over the cold stone, the carving strange and intricate. There was something about the symbols that made me feel uneasy, like they were calling to me, pulling at something deep inside. My thoughts were interrupted by a low sound, a faint whisper, almost indistinguishable from the wind, but somehow not. It came from the other side of the cemetery. I stood up quickly, my heart thudding in my chest. Was it the wind again? Was it something else? I couldn't tell, but I had to know. I started walking toward the source of the sound, my footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, as if it was beckoning me forward. It was a voice low, almost mournful, calling my name. I stopped. The voice wasn't familiar. It didn't sound human. Who was there? I called out, my voice shaking. But there was no answer. Just the wind and the whispers, now growing more frantic. I hesitated, but something inside me told me to move closer. I wasn't sure why, but I couldn't resist. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, but I'd come all this way. As I passed row after row of graves, the air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The world seemed to shrink around me, and the silence pressed in like a weight, suffocating. When I reached the far corner of the cemetery, the source of the whispers revealed itself. A large, ancient tree stood there, its twisted branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Beneath it, a fresh grave had been dug. The dirt had been recently disturbed. The whisper stopped. A cold chill ran down my spine as I stared at the grave. It was as though the very ground beneath me was holding its breath. There was something wrong here, something unnatural. I took a step forward, my foot landing heavily on the soil. The ground felt wrong. Soft. Too soft. I knelt down, my hand instinctively reaching out to touch the soil. As my fingers brushed against it, I felt a sudden, sharp jolt of energy. It was as though someone was trying to push through from beneath. I jerked my hand back, my heart racing in my chest. The air around me seemed to freeze, every sound vanishing as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, in the distance, I saw it. A figure standing in the shadow of the tree. It wasn't clear at first, just a vague silhouette, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw it more clearly. It was a person, a man, perhaps, but his features were obscured by shadows. He wasn't moving. He was just there. I could feel my pulse quicken. My instincts screamed at me to run. But I didn't. I couldn't. Who are you? I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, staring at me. Then, without warning, a sharp crack sounded from the ground beneath me. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The grave shifted, as though something was rising from it. It wasn't just the earth that was moving. The air was changing. I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the spot, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. And then I saw it, the hand. A skeletal hand emerging from the soil. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, locked in the grip of terror. The skeletal hand, pale and bony, pushed its way through the soft earth with an unsettling slowness, as though it had all the time in the world. It reached higher, fingers stretching, scraping at the dirt as if searching for something, someone. My breath caught in my throat. The whispering from the wind returned, louder now, like a chorus of voices murmuring from the depths of the earth. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading, desperate and familiar. It was as though they were calling me. I swallowed hard, trying to shake myself from my paralysis, but my legs refused to obey. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the sound deafening in the thick, heavy air. The hand continued its slow ascent, and then, as if by some invisible force, the rest of the arm followed. It was thin and frail, the skin pulled tight over the bone like old parchment, but the movement was unnervingly smooth. My mind raced. What was happening? What was this place? Suddenly, a sharp crack rang out from the grave, louder than anything I'd ever heard. The ground beneath me trembled, and a deep rumble seemed to rise from the earth itself. I staggered backward, my feet finally finding the strength to move. But it was too late. The figure, the man, or whatever it was, stepped out from the shadow of the tree. The air around him rippled, distorting like heat rising from pavement. His form was shifting, ever so slightly, as though it was made of smoke or mist, but there were detailed eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness, lips that seemed to twitch with some unspoken message. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only stare as he moved closer. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, swirling around me. They weren't just voices, they were sensations, feelings, memories pressing in from all sides. The past, my past, began to bleed into the present, and I felt an overwhelming wave of sorrow and regret. I thought of my father, lost to me years ago. My mother's face, once bright and warm, now a faded image. The letter. The grave. The figure stopped in front of me. It was so close now that I could see the details more clearly. His skin was stretched tight, as though the body beneath had been worn away, leaving only a shell. His eyes were hollow, but they seemed to pierce through me to see something hidden deep within. You shouldn't have come," the figure said, though his lips didn't move. The voice came from all around me, reverberating inside my skull. It was not a human voice. Something shifted in my chest. My heart, my very soul, felt like it was being pulled from within me. It was as if the figure had reached inside, touched something I didn't even know existed, and was trying to drag it into the grave with him. "You called me," I managed to whisper, though my throat felt dry and raw. "What is this? What do you want?" The figure's lips curled into a smile, a sickening, twisted thing. "You are here because you are lost," he said, his voice a rasping echo. "But you are not the only one." His hand reached forward, but I backed away, my legs finally working as I stumbled toward the trees. But as I turned, I realized that the world around me had changed. The graveyard, once open and desolate, now seemed like a maze, its paths twisting and turning in ways I couldn't make sense of. The air grew thicker, heavier, and the shadows around me seemed to grow longer, more oppressive. I could still feel the figure's presence looming behind me, his invisible grip tightening as I ran. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away. I bolted through the trees, the whispers growing louder with every step, drowning out everything else. The path seemed to shift, the ground beneath me changing. I stumbled, my hands brushing against the rough bark of the trees, the dark silhouettes twisting and warping in my vision. I couldn't escape. Then I heard it. A low growl, like the rumbling of a distant storm, but it was not distant. It was all around me. I turned, and there he was again, the figure. He was no longer alone. From the shadows behind him, other shapes emerged, figures too many to count as stepping from the graves, crawling from the earth. They were not entirely human, their forms distorted and broken, like remnants of souls that had never been allowed to rest. They moved toward me with a single, shared purpose. I could feel the panic rising, clawing at my insides. I was surrounded. My chest tightened as I gasped for breath, my eyes darting from figure to figure, each one a twisted reflection of something I couldn't quite grasp. Were these the lost ones? Were they me? Yet back. I screamed, stumbling back, my hands outstretched in defense. But it was no use. They were closing in. The whispers filled my ears again, louder than before, now forming words that I could understand. Join us. I reached out for something, anything to stop them. But my hand met nothing but the cold air. And then, all at once, everything went black. I woke to an overwhelming stillness. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I was. The air was thick, damp, and tasted of decay, but I couldn't see anything. It was as if the world around me had been swallowed by darkness. My heart raced in my chest as I sat up, my head pounding from the sudden awakening. The feeling of being trapped, the weight of something oppressive, the min clung to me. My body felt cold and unresponsive, as though I had been lying in the damp earth for far too long. I forced myself to stand. The ground beneath my feet was soft, but not like soil. It felt wrong, and even like I was standing on something alive. I couldn't tell if the ground was moving, or if it was my body, still struggling to comprehend what had happened. Where was I? The whispering was gone. The eerie voices that had once filled the air with a maddening hum had faded into silence. I strained my ears, but there was nothing now, nothing but the echo of my own breath. It was unnerving. I had expected the whispers to follow me, to continue their endless chant, but they were gone, as though they had never existed. I tried to focus, but my thoughts were a jumble. How had I gotten here? What was this place? I thought back to the graveyard, to the figure, the one who had spoken to me in that voice that wasn't his own. Had I truly been dragged into the earth? Was this a dream? Or worse, a nightmare that had no end? I took a step forward, my legs shaky, as I tried to steady myself. The air was thick with a musty scent, the smell of something ancient and rotting. And yet, it wasn't entirely unpleasant. There was something almost comforting about the stillness of the place, something that whispered to the very core of me, urging me to stay. But the unease in my chest wouldn't let me. The instinct to run, to escape, was stronger now. I had to get out of here. I forced myself to move, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could feel the air change with each movement I made, the atmosphere thickening. It was as if the world around me was breathing, exhaling in time with my footsteps. I reached out to touch something, a wall, a tree, anything, but found only emptiness. The space I was in felt endless, and yet it was as if the walls were closing in, shifting just beyond my reach. The feeling of being watched returned. My skin crawled, every nerve on edge. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. I wasn't alone. Then I heard it. I saw the soft scraping fade at first, but growing louder. It was rhythmic, almost mechanical, like something or someone dragging itself through the dirt. My heart skipped a beat. I turned toward the sound, my pulse quickening. The air seemed to press in on me from all sides. I couldn't see anything, but the sound, there was no mistaking it, was getting closer. I backed away, my body trembling with the rising tide of panic. The scraping grew louder, faster. It was coming for me. I strained my eyes, but the darkness was unyielding. I couldn't make out any shapes, no movement, just the sound that grew louder with each passing second. It felt like the earth itself was alive, closing in on me from every direction. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the sound stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. I stood there, frozen, waiting. Every part of me screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My feet were stuck, rooted to the ground as though the earth itself was holding me in place. I opened my mouth to call out, but no sound came. Something was there. something close. I felt the shift before I saw it. A presence, cold and suffocating, began to press in on me. A shadow, dark, vast, and somehow familiar, emerged from the darkness. It was not like the figure I had seen before, but it was no less terrifying. It was something ancient, something that had been waiting, patient and unhurried, for far too long. It moved toward me, the weight of its presence pulling the air tight around us. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat seeming louder than the last. "You are mine," the voice came again. It wasn't a voice, it was a sensation, a feeling that seemed to come from within me, from the very depth of my soul. It was overwhelming, all-encompassing, and it flooded my mind with images, memories that weren't mine. A woman's face, pale and drawn, her eyes hollow and lifeless. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. A child, wrapped in tattered cloth, crying out to be heard. A door slamming shut, locking me in. The images swirled around me, vivid and painful, like memories I had forgotten and yet couldn't escape. I reached out, desperate to push them away, but they only grew stronger, more intense, until I felt I might drown in them. The shadow loomed closer, its shape now more defined. It was not human, not entirely. It was a form, a thing that defied logic, its edges shifting like smoke, ever-changing. I could feel its eyes if they were eyes on me, watching, waiting. "You called," the shadow whispered. "And now you will join us." I took a step back, shaking my head. No, this couldn't be real. It couldn't be. But as I stumbled backward, the ground beneath me began to tremble. A sharp, deafening crack split the air, and I felt the earth shift again, tilting in impossible ways. I looked down to find the ground opening up, a deep fissure running through it, swallowing everything in its path. The shadow moved closer still, its form swirling and shifting, growing larger, darker. And I could feel it, the cold, the death, the past that was never meant to return. I couldn't escape. The world around me began to crumble, the darkness closing in, and I realized that I wasn't just trapped in this place. I was becoming part of it, and there was no going back. I don't remember how long I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the shadow as it grew ever closer. It felt like hours, days in eternity, but in reality, it must have only been moments. Moments that stretched and contorted until time itself no longer made sense. I couldn't move. Every inch of my body screamed to run, to get away from the suffocating darkness, but my feet were glued to the ground. I could feel the weight of something ancient pressing down on me, as though the very earth I stood on was alive and had chosen me as its next victim. The darkness, the shadow, was now right in front of me. I could feel the chill radiating from it, as though it was sucking all warmth and life out of the air, leaving nothing but an empty, frozen void. The smell of decay grew stronger, sharp and acrid, filling my nostrils with the stench of something long dead. And then it spoke again. "You cannot escape," the voice whispered, its tone low and cold. It wasn't a voice at all, really. It was more like a thought, no, a command that burrowed deep inside my mind. It wasn't just hearing it, it was feeling it in every fiber of my being, as if my body itself was being pulled into its will. The shadow as form shifted, swirling like smoke, and from its depths, I could see vague shapes, visions shifting in and out of focus. They weren't just images, though. They felt real. They felt alive. A man, hunched over in the corner of a room, clutching his chest, gasping for breath, his face contorted in agony. A woman, pale and shaking, standing in the middle of an empty street, her mouth open in a silent scream, her eyes wide with terror. And a child, small and alone, crawling towards something just out of sight, reaching for it with trembling hands. My chest tightened, my heart threatening to burst from my ribs. I felt the cold fingers of fear wrap around my throat, choking me. Why? I wanted to scream. Why am I seeing this? What do you want from me? But the words never made it past my lips. My throat was dry, parched, as though I hadn't spoken in years. I could feel my chest constrict, the weight of something heavy pressing against my lungs. The shadow did not answer. Instead, it loomed closer, its form now impossibly large, swallowing everything around me. The air was thick with its presence, its energy. And yet, I could still hear the faintest sound, barely perceptible, like a whisper beneath the darkness. A soft scraping. It started as a whisper, faint and distant, but it grew louder, more distinct. The sound of something or someone moving through the darkness. A dragging sound, slow and deliberate. It was coming for me. I tried to move, to break free, but my legs were still frozen, my body unresponsive. It felt as though the ground beneath me was holding me in place, rooting me to the earth. My breath came in short gasps, and the scraping sound grew louder, closer. The shadow moved again, shifting and curling in on itself like a predator closing in on its prey. I could hear the hiss of its form, the sound of air being sucked into its depths, but there were no words this time. Only silence. And then the scrapey stopped. For a brief moment there was nothing but silence. The world was still. The air heavy, suffocating. But then, just as I thought I might escape, just as I thought the nightmare might end, there was a sound. A faint, haunting cry. A childish cry. I spun around, my eyes searching the darkness for the source of the sound. I couldn't see anything, just endless shadows, shifting and stretching like fingers reaching out to grab me. But the cry came again, louder this time, desperate. It was coming from the depths of the shadow. I had no choice. I had to move. I pushed myself forward, my body unwilling to cooperate, but I stumbled, forcing my legs to carry me. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stand here any longer, waiting for whatever horrors the shadow had in store for me. But no matter how hard I tried to run, the ground seemed to stretch away from me, pulling me back. I reached out, my hands groping blindly through the air, but everything felt wrong. The air was thick and dense, like I was wading through tar, and every step I took felt like it was dragging me deeper into the void. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The panic was overwhelming, suffocating, and all I could hear now was that crying the childish voice, shrill and pained. And then, just when I thought I would collapse under the weight of it all, I saw it. A figure. A silhouette in the distance, barely visible in the darkness. A woman, her face twisted in agony, her arms stretched out as if reaching for something or someone. I knew then that I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one trapped here. I had to get to her. She was the only thing that felt real in this nightmare. I forced my legs to move again, pushing through the heavy air, my lungs burning with each breath. The figure in the distance grew closer, and I could see her more clearly now, her eyes wide, desperate, pleading for help. But as I reached out to her, she vanished, slipping back into the shadows, as if she had never been there at all. The sound of the childish cry echoed in the air, louder now, overwhelming. The ground beneath me shifted again, and this time it wasn't just earth. It was the air itself, warping, twisting, pulling me in. I was losing myself. I had to get out. But no matter how much I tried, I knew deep down that there was no way out. I wasn't just in a place of death. I was part of it now, and it was only a matter of time before it claimed me. I woke up to silence. The air was still, far too still. It felt wrong. The weight of the darkness still clung to me, its cold tendrils wrapping around my body, but I couldn't feel the ground beneath my feet anymore. Instead, I was suspended in an unnatural void, an endless stretch of nothing. The shadows were no longer moving, but I could still feel them watching me. They lingered in the corners of my mind, scratching at the edges of my sanity. I forced my eyes open. The world didn't make sense. Where was I? The familiar hum of reality, the noise of the world, the breath of the wind, the rustling of leaves had disappeared. I couldn't hear anything. Not even my own breathing. The silence was oppressive, as though everything had been swallowed whole by the void. But somehow, in the depths of that silence, I could still hear that whisper. You cannot escape. I tried to stand, but my body felt weak and steady. My hands trembled as I reached out for something, anything, to ground myself. But the air around me was thick, suffocating. It wasn't like the world I knew. It was something else. Something wrong. And then, like a nightmare bleeding into reality, the shapes started to appear again. They weren't solid, not in the way they should be. They flickered like faulty television static, forming and dissolving in the blink of an eye. There was the man again, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with terror. The woman, standing in the middle of the street, still silent, her expression frozen in fear. And the child's face was the most disturbing of all. There was something off about it, something wrong in the way it looked at me. The face twisted, stretched, and shifted like it was caught in a perpetual state of decay. The child's eyes, no, they weren't eyes at all, hollow, empty sockets where life should have been. They stared at me, empty and vacant, but they didn't feel lifeless. No, these eyes were full of something. Full of hunger. I staggered back, the floor beneath me no longer stable, as though the very surface of this place was in constant flux. I tried to focus on something, anything to keep me grounded. But the more I tried to make sense of my surroundings, the more I felt myself slipping away from them. The figures, those specters, were still there, flickering and shifting. But now they were moving. They were moving toward me. I couldn't tell if they were real or if it was just my mind breaking, but I couldn't risk staying here. I needed to move. I needed to find an exit, even if I had no idea where to start. But the moment I turned, I froze. A low growl echoed through the silence, distant but unmistakable. My heart slammed against my ribcage. I knew that sound. It wasn't just a growl. It was the sound of something deep and primal. Something hungry. I turned to face the source of the noise. It was hard to see, the shadows bleeding into the void, but I could make out a shape. A figure larger than the rest. A hulking mass of dark, shifting tendrils, its body shifting like liquid. Its presence wasn't just something I could see. It was something I could feel in the marrow of my bones. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. Its shape was constantly changing, its features never remaining the same for more than a few moments. But I could feel its eyes on me, even though it had no face. There was something terrible, almost ancient in the way it moved, its tendrils lashing out into the nothingness. And I knew deep down that I wasn't meant to see it. It wasn't just a creature. It was the presence. It was the very essence of this place. It was the darkness. I stumbled backward, my legs shaking, but there was nowhere to go. The space around me was closing in, narrowing, shrinking. The shadows pressed in from all sides, suffocating me. The growl grew louder, more pronounced, and I could feel the air shift, becoming thick and oppressive. Every breath was a struggle. It was coming for me. I could hear its growl now, low and guttural, vibrating through my chest, reverberating in the very air. The figure in front of me stretched its arms, its limbs elongating unnaturally, its form warping like a sickening reflection in a broken mirror. It reached out, tendrils lashing toward me, but I couldn't move. My feet were stuck, frozen in place. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat was tight, choked by the weight of the presence around me. But it was too late. The figure lunged. Its tendrils wrapped around me, cold and slick, pulling me into its embrace. I could feel its mass, its weight crushing me as I was pulled into the depths of its void. The air was sucked out of my lungs, and I felt myself sinking into it, my body twisting in ways it shouldn't. I was no longer in control of anything. I was nothing. Just a broken piece of whatever nightmare this place was. As the darkness closed in, I felt my mind unraveling. My thoughts dissolved into nothingness, slipping through my fingers like sand. Was this death? Or was this something worse? I couldn't tell anymore. I was lost in the void. But then, just as I thought I would be consumed completely, I felt a shift. A faint light, barely perceptible, pierced through the suffocating darkness. And I reached for it. But I didn't know if it would save me, or if it would bring me back to where it all began. Oh, you made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.